Hey, I am Jeremy Hersh, the writer and director of the movie The Surrogate, and I'm joined here today by my friend Sarah Parker, who is someone who was really um, crucial to the research process that I underwent when I was writing the script. And you were, you were involved. You were someone who I could consult, during the pre-production of the film as well. It wasn't just the writing.
And I was a surrogate. So I'm Sarah, and Jeremy and I met. We had to go back quite a ways to find out when we met. We met in April of 2015, which was about 2 months after I gave birth to the Surro baby. I was a surrogate for a family member and his husband, and it couldn't have gone better. We were very lucky. We didn't have to deal with any of the challenges that Jess has to deal with in this movie, but I'm very glad that it was something that was brought up in this film, because it's absolutely something that happens to people who get involved in surrogacy often, and it's not spoken about.
And can we talk about, like, because the two different terms of gestational surrogacy versus traditional surrogacy. You were a traditional
Yes,
surrogate,
I
right?
was a traditional surrogate. So it was my egg. I was egg donor and carrier. Um, and it was a super easy process. I was totally fine with genetics not playing a factor in it whatsoever. I actually liked the idea of doing my surrogacy as natural as possible. I did not like the idea of having to go through IVF. I also wanted to keep it as natural and inexpensive to the parents as well. It's a huge cost for anyone to go through the IVF process, and we were lucky enough to get pregnant on the second try. Gestational surrogacy would be following the in vitro fertilization process, where a donor egg is fertilized with whoever the intended father's sperm, and then it is implanted into the surrogate. Um, Through medical procedure, the surrogate would have to go through months of injections to get her body ready to receive the implantation or the transplant. At that point, you decide how many embryos you are going to transfer, and that's always a big discussion in surrogacy. That's how you get Octomom. If anyone remembers that story. Most doctors will only transplant 2 embryos at the most. That's how you see a lot of in vitro twins, if both of them take.
And
Yeah,
twins can have different biological fathers, different sperm donors, right?
yeah. It's awesome for gay men who have the money to pursue an option where they can implant 2 embryos into a surrogate and each be the father.
The cost thing is something that it is talked about, but I think it's maybe not talked about enough. That, like, it's really expensive to go through IVF.
Absolutely. So we met through a Facebook surrogacy group.
I had posted on, like, a message board website, and then someone had, like, screen capped it and put it in a Facebook group that you're in, right?
Yeah. So I was a member of a couple different surrogacy Facebook groups. I believe the one that we met through, I'm still a member of. In the surrogacy community, I learned really quickly that you're going to meet a whole range of types of people going through this, women who are looking to be surrogates. You know, and I think I saw your post, or I saw the question, and I felt like, oh my gosh, this poor man is gonna potentially get either like the craziest people to be involved with, or the people who just want to shut him down immediately, because unfortunately most people involved in the surrogacy community, as soon as they hear anything about movie, their mind goes straight to the absolute worst.
Which is understandable because,
Yeah,
like,
which is understandable. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the majority of movies and representation on screen at all of surrogacy is like verging on anti-surrogacy propaganda. Like there's a different movie called The Surrogate also that is a Lifetime movie from like 10 years ago, that and there's a bunch of movies like this. Yeah, the idea is that the surrogate is going into this in order to basically steal this a husband from his wife, and that there's always like an ulterior motive, and that she's greedy, there's like it's the money, um and then also just a lot of stuff that's super inaccurate about it. You know, when I was first reaching out to these message boards, I was like, this is so weird, like why is no one responding to me? And then I realized like, oh, okay, I understand why they're skeptical of anyone who's like making a movie. Because hadn't there also been someone who reached out to one of these groups that was, they were like, oh, I'm a TV producer, like this, we're interested in, we're making a documentary, and it
Well,
was
I think it was a reality show, to
right.
be honest, where they wanted the potential surrogate to move in with the family. It was likely to be a nightmare. Personally, I had a really easy process with deciding to be a surrogate. I mean, I grew up absolutely wanting to be as much of an ally to the gay and lesbian community as possible. And after I had my two children, and I had so many people that I knew that were struggling to figure out how they were going to have children someday, I woke up one day, I think, I mean, it had to have been brewing in the back of my head for a while, but I woke up one day and was like, I'm going to have a baby for somebody. So I, kind of had decided to reach out to a family member on my husband's side. And I approached him and his boyfriend at the time at a family reunion, and they were absolutely shocked, and I was a little embarrassed, and I thought I did something wrong, and I seriously had this picture in my mind that they were gonna cry immediately and hug me, you know what I mean? Like, because I was excited about it. I had, yeah, and I'm like, oh geez, like this is a way, like to me it wasn't a big deal, like not a big deal at all. And I realized to them it was like, wow, like a huge deal. So that was over the summer, and they went home to New York. And I mean, New York is challenging a little bit with their surrogacy laws, but I hadn't even heard a peep from them whatsoever until Thanksgiving. So it took them from the summer until Thanksgiving to do their research, to figure out if we could even do this, to find, a lawyer in New York, a lawyer where I am. And so, yeah, so after Thanksgiving, they let me know that they were on board.
Just going back a little bit, something that
Mhm.
I find interesting in terms of like your journey is you've kind of mentioned to me that like you initially brought it up with your husband and it was kind of a half joke, like it was right, and then
Yeah.
it kind of slowly like became less and less of a joke.
Yeah, exactly. Because he's used to me being like, I'm going to donate a kidney, or I'm going to, do all this stuff. So I think he was just kind of like, oh, geez. But then he realized that I was serious about it. So he supported me from day one. Yeah. Jeremy, do you remember at what point in the script writing? I don't think you probably had a script started when we talked, but you definitely had an idea because you were able to give me a clear picture of, what the movie was going to be about.
Yeah. And so we talked for the first time in April of 2015, and then I wrote the first draft of the script in September, I believe. Obviously, like the character and everything that happens in the script is not based on you, but there were certain things that you had taught me, or that from your experience in terms of the logistics of um, of how they went about this, and then things about how the term second parent adoption and how that's what you have to go through when you're doing a um, traditional surrogacy. Um, and so that, kind of informed um, some of what we see on screen, but more so like the backstory of what this character goes through. We were talking the other day, and you were talking about the scene in the yoga class.
Oh my God, I was just gonna bring that up. Yeah,
Yeah.
so like it is so short, but it is exactly like it was perfect. And I don't think I told you to put this exact, like I don't think we talked about putting this exact phrase in the movie, but you nailed it like so well, because the responses that I heard and other surrogates hear when they tell someone, a stranger, that they're a surrogate, I mean, the best surrogacy joke you get to use is when someone asks you about your pregnancy and you say it's not mine. And then they get the puzzled look. And then the first thing everybody says is, and this is why, you learn not to hold it against anyone because it's offensive, but the first thing they said is, I could never do that. Or, you know, start asking very personal questions about how you became pregnant. I mean, everybody's mind goes in lots of places, but the like, the I could never do that response was a big one. I got that all the time, and I'm like, yes, you could. I mean, that was my like exact response back usually to people. I realize now. I mean, no, not everyone can do it, but you know,
It's
it was
interesting.
when I saw. I just I like that little. I was so happy. I'm proud of you when that made it into the movie because yeah, it was exactly how it is.
I'm just trying to think of like, why is that something that is so common for people's minds to go to that place? It's interesting how they're like they're in a way it's like making it about themselves, but it's also kind of like it's almost like, wow, you're so strange, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's meant that way, but I think surrogates have to realize that it's actually a compliment and
yeah,
not offensive because it does mean, that you're a special person for
right.
being able to do this. But it's usually not said like that. Usually it's more like you're a terrible person for being able to do
I could
this.
never.
And that's why, most traditional surrogates, and same with me, is I mean, not everyone needed to know that I didn't go through IVF, that I wasn't also the egg donor. I mean, the people that I didn't tell that aspect to, if they saw pictures now of the little girl, I mean, there's no way that I wasn't the egg donor. I mean, the resemblance is uncanny. So I do realize that that's not a lie. A lot of people can like keep up, or something that they should omit because sometimes genes are really strong.
But it's interesting how because that's another thing that people are obsessed with. And we were talking about this also, of like how in like every movie that's not every, but in a ton of movies that involve surrogacy or involve any like type of sort of non-traditional pregnancy, there's always like, even if it's not a comedy, there's just this obsession with like a semen in a cup, and just people think that's like the funniest thing. And we were kind of like, well, what's so funny about that? And if it
Mhm.
was funny, it's old at this point. Like, it's
Exactly. Yeah.
not.
A lot of traditional parent couples have to use, you know, interesting ways to get pregnant. So it's really, yeah. But every interaction that Jess had with people in the movie regarding surrogacy was very well done. She acted it well, you wrote it well, it was directed well, yeah, it was great.
This kind of relates to a question that I got a lot from people who have not been surrogates and aren't maybe super familiar with that world, which is, a lot of the people who were giving me feedback on the script. I wanted a lot of different feedback from different people. And so this was a note that I would get on the script. And then also again in the edit process, that was like, well, why does she do it in the first place? Like, we need to understand like the reason why. Kind of thinking that there's a simple answer to that question, when I think it's like it's such an open question that is unanswerable with actual surrogates, because
Yeah.
it's like when you tell your story, and yeah, you're talking about like, well, anyone can do this, and that it just was like second nature to you, kind of, and that, yeah, that you just kind of have this personality that's extremely generous. You're talking about wanting to give away one of your kidneys and stuff like that, and that's not most people. So that was something that I wanted to come across, that like I didn't want it to make it some simple like, well, she had this thing happen to her, and then that's that A plus B equals C. She decided to become a surrogate. It's like, no, she just is someone who has this really specific type of personality that
Hmm.
surrogates have, which is this, like, I would say just unusually generous spirit.
Yeah, exactly. And watching the film, you realize if that's a question that people have in the beginning of the movie, I think it gets answered throughout the movie, because Jess's personality, you learn just throughout the whole movie, is she, sometimes she's awkward with her words, and she can, but it's definitely the type of person who would be a surrogate, like, who wouldn't want to like give this amazing gift to their gay best friends, like, and make it an easy process for them. Like, my question is more like, why not, why wouldn't she, if you're in a position and you're healthy and you're, you know open to, a lot of women just love being pregnant. Like, maybe she just really liked the idea of being pregnant, like providing this amazing gift to her friends who she loved so much, without having it cost them tens of thousands of dollars and a lot of heartache. But I think that question gets answered throughout the film, just with her personality.
Right. Well, yeah. Um, yeah, and I think like going back to this thing about that question of people like, or that response of people being like, I could never do that, and I do think that the character in the yoga class, like, there's like a positive side to that, of like, oh my god, like, that's so admirable, I could never do that, you're a better person than me. But then there's also, I think, and this relates to, I think, a lot of the representations of surrogacy that we see in on TV and stuff, like that movie I mentioned earlier, that people are like, when someone is so unusually generous, people people don't see that side of themselves, then they can look at it and be like, what's the ulterior motive here? She
Mm,
seems just like she's wanting to do this to help someone,
yep.
and she's altruistic, but that can't be, because people like, and just assuming that people have that you can't just be altruistic, so that
Mhm.
assuming that there's some kind of financial or some other kind of ulterior motive.
Yeah, yeah,
um
yeah. Like, the financial motive, is big for a lot of surrogates, and that's absolutely fine. I always felt like I had to add, onto, I'm a surrogate, but I'm not getting paid, like, type of thing. There's so many different ways surrogacy is played out in real life. There are so many cousins and friends and siblings and in-laws and that are willing to be a surrogate for particular people. It takes a different type of person to join an agency and pursue surrogacy that way, and that's fine. It gives them a layer of protection that people who kind of do this off on the other side don't have. But there are many, many, many families being made by extra loving family members and friends, that I don't think it's anything taboo or shouldn't be talked about or should be talked about in a crazy way, you know.
no, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, this is the first time. I mean, even when things go wrong, what Jess did, you can't take away the fact that, you know, she did an amazing thing for them, and it's being done all over the place all the time. There are new people on the Facebook groups all the time, and most of them are, I'm planning to be a surrogate for my brother-in-law, I'm planning to be a surrogate for my cousin. So
And it's, I guess I find it hard to find numbers because that type of arrangement is, it's not really documented publicly.
mhm.
But I feel like I've been told that the vast majority of surrogacies are through agencies, through IVF. They're just
Yeah, those are, yeah, easily documented. So yeah.
right. And so those yeah, and then people in that community would sometimes say that, like, traditional surrogacy isn't real surrogacy, right?
Hmm.
Or,
Absolutely. Yeah, there's
um,
definitely a divide between the two.
and it is the economic thing is really interesting because on the one hand, I do think people should be paid for it, especially, like, involves taking off time from work, and, like, so I think it's, surrogates should be paid. And yet, yeah, like we've said, this system of, you have to pay the agency, you have to pay, there's all these costs in the IVF itself. It becomes something that excludes people who are not wealthy.
Yep, yep. And I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm supportive of people who absolutely decide to pursue surrogacy the way I did with a family member who I loved and trusted, who we agreed on everything. I mean, we still had lawyers, we still had, you know, the contract, which many contracts aren't able to be legally enforced. It's more of an agreement. We got a copy of someone else's agreement. We went through it line by line with lawyers. Um, we had to have some hard conversations, which luckily we didn't have to, go into more detail about. But yeah, I'm supportive of this type of traditional surrogacy as long as there are contracts and conversations involved. I don't think people should go into it just like thinking they're gonna get pregnant and have this baby and everything's gonna be perfect. Um,
Yeah, well, thank you so much for doing this. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, like, getting to know you has been one of the best experiences of this.
I agree. I know, who would have ever thought that this was gonna like
Yeah,
spawn a 5-year friendship where you stayed at my house.
more than 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, forever friendship with, you know, our different backgrounds. I'm a middle-aged housewife in the suburbs who, was brought together with like a New York City filmmaker to be a part of this. And I'm sorry it didn't, the big premiere didn't turn out the way that you wanted it to, but I'm glad that we're able to still celebrate your movie the way it should be celebrated.